The food they gave me here was a little better than the food we were given before. It was mostly vegetarian, although sometimes it contained meat. Perhaps mammoth? But I didn't like it that much. It was, according to my standards, undercooked. I was kept inside this room for a long time, constantly monitored. Every day followed the same routine. First, they tested my physical ability and strength, trying to determine my limits. Then they tested my cognition with different kinds of problem-solving tests, similar to standard IQ tests. And lastly, they interrogated me with different methods. The most successful way of communication was by drawing. I wasn't a very skilled painter, but I was still able to explain certain basic concepts. I did try to learn as much as I could about their language during this time, though. I was even given a lexicon, but it was extremely difficult. I couldn't understand more than a few words, signs, and names. I had some success in translating their numerical system. The main difference was that they didn't use the decimal system, but the duodecimal system. Their objectives with communicating with me seemed to be to understand the technology we brought with us, and where it came from. They always gave me our phones, both mine and Alex's, and instructed me to explain. Their batteries had died, which they seemed to understand, but they didn't believe me when I claimed to be ignorant of how to charge them up again. I did, however, draw a communication satellite orbiting a globe, and although that this was beyond their current level of technology, the idea didn't seem completely alien to them. If anything, they seemed rather impressed by it, as if they had just begun to think about such things themselves. As to my place of origin, I deliberately lied to them from blocking the passage for me in case I needed to escape later on. Interestingly enough, they never resorted to torture. They appeared to care a lot about my health, even though I was still losing weight at an alarming rate. One day, during the interrogations, they showed me black and white photographs of fossils. There was a skull on one of them. It had belonged to an anatomically modern Homo sapiens. The interrogator put a world map on the table and pointed to an area in East Africa. I nodded and inspected the region more closely than I could have done before. To my surprise, I noticed a pair of large lakes, but still tiny on the map, in the vicinity of what would have been Tanzania in my world. First, I didn't think much of it, but after I returned to my room later and thought about it a great deal, they didn't belong there. I couldn't be entirely sure, but I didn't have a perfect picture of the world map in my head, but I became more or less convinced that those lakes weren't part of my world. Perhaps, I thought, they were a point of divergence. Maybe they were craters. Something must have hit us in this world before we had time to leave Africa. But after the ancestors of the Neanderthals did, I opened my eyes and said out loud, "My God, we went extinct." After a month or two, I hadn't learned how their calendar worked, so I'm not sure what unit of time they would have used. The doors opened in the middle of the night. I could see the silhouettes of the researchers and officers on the other side of the window. A red light lit them from behind, and the shadow of cigarette smoke rose to the ceiling. A small dark figure entered the room. A loud voice came from the speakers. It wasn't speaking to me, but to the figure that had just come inside my room. My heartbeat went into overdrive and I thought it was going to bust out of my chest. I hid under my covers. As the figure stepped into the red light coming from the window, I saw that it was a girl. Given how much smaller she was compared to the other women, and how youthful she looked, it became clear to me that she was a teenager, not older than 16 years old. It didn't take long for me to understand what was going on. Their reproductive ethics were nothing like my own. I quickly got up from the bed, covering my naked body with the covers, and walked over to the window. "You can't do this!" I yelled, banging on the glass with both my hands. "Get her out of here, please!" It was hopeless. I tried to open the door, but it was locked as usual. The girl hid away in the corner when she saw me, and I hid away in the other end of the room. The speaker kept talking, and after a few minutes, the Neanderthal girl tried to approach me. She slowly walked toward me, but as soon as she came too close, I quickly ran to the other side of the room. She was forced somehow. Perhaps they threatened her family. Or had she volunteered out of honor? It didn't matter. I was being forced. They had tested my abilities, compared my hereditary potential to their own, and decided to mix their species with mine to create a superior being. Perhaps to finally outcompete the Denisovians. You don't understand! It's a mistake! You're dooming yourself to oblivion! I didn't know how to explain it so that they could understand. I kept running away from the girl as soon as she came close. In the morning, when the lights turned on, I could see her more properly. She was wearing thin fabrics, revealing her naked body underneath, and her hair was black. She looked sad, but there were no tears in her big eyes. Her rapid breathing made it clear to me that she was just as afraid as I was, if not more. They didn't feed me, nor the girl this day. I began to cry, for the second time in this place. They knew what they were doing. No food or water until... Realizing this, the futility of it all, I once more banged on the window. She's a child, goddammit! My voice echoed into nothingness. The Neanderthal commander lit a cigarette. According to these people, I had to assume it didn't matter how young the girl was as long as she was fertile. I refused for 3 days. Both the girl and I was dying of thirst. Most likely, they wouldn't let me die, but I was pretty sure they would sacrifice her. In the end, I couldn't let that happen. During the 3 days, I tried to communicate with the girl. Of course, we didn't understand each other, but we did learn each other's names. Her name was Dora. I cried for the 3rd time during the act. I shut my eyes and tried to imagine something, someone else. But, of course, there wasn't any pleasure. All I felt was anger toward my captors that silently watched us. On the 4th day, they came inside and got the girl. I tried to tell her I was sorry, and although she didn't understand my words, I think she understood. The next day, I was given a pretty substantial meal. This time, they even added fruit. They looked alien to me, but I wasn't surprised by that. Most fruits I was used to had been domesticated, cultivated for millennia. By humans. It was natural for another hominid species to do it differently than us. There was a bitter taste to most of the fruit, but it was still an improvement to what I'd been given so far. Several months passed. I did my best to forget about Dora, constantly trying to convince myself that I didn't have a choice. The endless examinations, interrogations continued. From time to time, new officers and researchers arrived to pick my mind. I always complied. Occasionally, I tried to ask them about the whereabouts of Alex, but without success. Each time they took me to the examination room, I tried to find weaknesses in the security. I counted the guards, the doors, and tried to come up with a plan to escape. But in my weakened condition, and given their superior physical strength, I didn't have a chance. I slowly gave up, crying myself to sleep every night. But one of those nights, everything changed. I was awakened by the sound of a gunshot. Someone screamed, and then there was another gunshot. Everything went silent for a minute. I sat up and tried to listen. Nothing. All I heard was my frozen breath. Then the door to my room opened. A heavily cloaked and veiled figure appeared. "Who's there?" I asked. The figure grabbed my arm. I tried to fight it off, but then I saw who it was. It was Dora. She wanted me to come with her. Although I was confused about what was going on, my instinct immediately told me to take this opportunity. I covered my body with the bedcloths and followed her down the corridor. She was wearing one of the soldiers' guns. I had no idea how she got her hands on it, but given the circumstances, it was clear to me that she had escaped somehow. A researcher, shot to death, lay in a pool of blood on the floor. Dora was quick. Although I could only see her eyes under her hood, I could tell she was determined, and that her life depended on her success in this attempt. As to why she had chosen to save me, if that was what she was doing, I had no idea. She had stolen some kind of card and opened door after door, She stopped and signaled me to do the same. Around the corner I could hear a radio chatter. Dora shut her eyes for a few seconds. Then she loaded the rifle in a swift motion and stepped around the corner and pulled the trigger. Shit, I whispered to myself as I followed Dora around the corner. The guard was shot in the head, right between the eyes, and blocked the door to the elevator that brought me to this place. She picked up the rifle and checked if it was loaded, and gave it to me without hesitation. It was heavy, but that might have just been because of my weakened condition. As soon as Dora pulled the lever to the elevator, an alarm sounded and a red light filled the corridor. Her escape must have been reported now. Just before the platform descended, a group of guards came running towards us. Luckily, this elevator had a roof which made it impossible for them to shoot down at us. Dora reloaded her rifle again, and when we approached the bottom floor, the garage, she sat down and pointed the rifle in front of her. She gestured towards me, seemingly telling me to sit down behind her. I was too afraid or too frantic to use my rifle in my hand. I just covered behind her. The alarm echoed throughout the garage. 4 guards waited for us a few meters away. Dora immediately shot one of them and ran to the right. I followed. The other 3 guards yelled and began chasing us. They both fired upon us but missed, or perhaps more likely chose not to hit me because they wanted me alive. I turned around and fired my rifle, holding it to my belly, hitting one of the guards in the leg. It was pure luck. I hadn't aimed at all. Dora stopped next to one of the cars, shut the door handle off with her rifle and entered. I sat down next to her. I could see more guards exit the elevator. However, as Dora drove off, ramming the road barrier, the guards didn't try to come after us. I hyperventilated as Dora sped up to almost 100 miles per hour. The engine rumbled and roared like an angry beast. Dora steered to the side, and half a second later a group of Denisovian slaves swished past us. They were walking in the middle of the road. Next, I saw the door to the room where they'd taken Alex. I yelled for Dora to stop, pointing at the side of the tunnel. She looked at me confused. We didn't have any time to stop. I felt like I betrayed my friend, but I didn't have a choice. Most likely, I thought, they'd taken him somewhere else by now. We came upon the bridge from earlier. The sound of the falling water drowned the sound of the raging engine of the car. Dora hit the brakes hard. I almost flew through the windshield. We spun out of control on the wet, slippery road, and then, in an instant, came to a full stop. Dora stepped out onto the road. I didn't understand what was happening until I got out. The water vapor formed such a thick mist around us that it was difficult to breathe. And behind all that mist, on the other side of the bridge, I saw it. A barricade that had been set up to stop us. Dora stood in front of me, her rifle over her shoulder, and stared at the shadows behind the mist. We couldn't go back from where we had come. I had no idea how we could get out of this situation. Dora didn't share my uncertainty. She turned around and walked towards me with an assertive step. I was so confused, scared, and ready to give up, but Dora seemed to know exactly where she was going. She grabbed my hand and said something I couldn't understand and dragged me to the ledge of the bridge. Without hesitation, she climbed up on it. I looked around. The cars on the other end of the bridge started their engines. They knew what was going on, and so did I, even though I didn't want to believe it. I climbed up next to Dora. I took her small hand in my own and looked her in the eyes. And then, we jumped. We resurfaced inside a warm underground pool. I climbed out of the water and helped Dora, who couldn't swim with all of her thick clothes, on shore. She still had her rifle, but I had lost mine. A blue ultraviolet light shone down on us from the ceiling. I froze in place as I looked around. The room, reminiscent of a Turkish bath, was filled with naked Neanderthal women. They laid spread out on carved rocks or floated around on their backs in the water, smoking long pipes. After a few seconds, I noticed that they didn't care about us. They were high out of their minds from whatever they were smoking. An opium den, I said to myself in disbelief. Dora, now limping on her left leg, began walking. One of the women grabbed her leg with a weak grip. Dora pointed a rifle at her and pulled the trigger with no hesitation. But nothing happened. The ammunition must have been ruined under the water. She turned the rifle around and hit the woman in the head with it. No one reacted. There was a set of red clothes on the wall. Dora pointed at them. I put them on and covered my face. It wouldn't fool anyone for long, but maybe it would buy me a few seconds. We sneaked up a flight of stairs and entered the empty corridor. We turned the corner just to find another empty corridor. Then we walked up another set of stairs and entered a third, equally empty corridor. It was a maze. From time to time we passed a few civilians or workers who weren't on duty. They didn't seem to know who we were. Probably had been kept a secret to everyone except a select few. We stepped into a long hallway with armed guards on the other end. Both walls had rows of hollowed-out, barred alcoves filled with Denisovian prisoners, all of them yelling and wailing. From what I could tell, they had been recently captured and their spirits weren't entirely broken yet. The guards shouted at us as soon as they saw us. One of them picked up his radio from his belt and yelled something into it. We tried going back, but stopped in our tracks as we heard more guards coming from that direction. Once again, we were trapped. The guards on the other end were joined by a group of soldiers that began walking through the hallway towards us. We didn't have anything to defend ourselves with. I was sure this was it. The end of our futile attempt at escaping. Dora, too short to reach it, pointed at what looked like a set of controls on the wall. At first I didn't react, not because it was too difficult to understand, but because I was too stressed to think. Dora shouted at me. I snapped out of my paralysis and grabbed the biggest lever on the panel, but Dora kept trying to tell me something. I was doing it wrong somehow. I had to stop, look at the panel and think. An almost impossible task. Next to the lever, there were sets of metal switches. Without thinking about what they could be, I began flipping all of them in a frantic motion. Dora leaned her head against the wall and closed her eyes. It was time to pull the lever. Although all of this happened in less than a minute, it felt like an eternity. I thought the lever was stuck at first, but it was only I who was weaker than I had ever been before. The soldiers had started running towards us now and even fired at me. They probably didn't follow their orders, given that they had avoided firing at me before, but rather acted out of fear of what I was doing. The bullets bounced off the walls next to my head. I screamed, grabbed the lever with my other hand, as well as using my body weight to pull it down. Clunk! It worked. I had no idea what would happen, but I didn't have to wait long to find out. The cells, represented by the switches, opened up and the prisoners leached out and turned on their tormentors. In the chaos that followed, Dora took me by the hand and sneaked past everything. In the middle of the hallway, close to the floor, there was a ventilation shaft. Dora grabbed a rifle from a soldier being attacked by a Denisovian and kicked open the shaft. We crawled inside. The echo from the screams faded away as we went forward. The air flowing through it was ice cold. After some time, we passed above the room where two researchers examined something large on a round table. I stopped and looked down the air vent. Alex! The researchers looked up at me. Their mouths were covered with surgical masks. My heart dropped to my feet. Alex's naked body was strapped to the table, like a macabre version of the Vitruvian Man. His head was missing. Dora, who crawled in front of me, gestured for me to continue. I had no choice but to comply. My God, he's dead. He's dead, he's dead. I whispered, trying to hold my tears back. Maybe he'd died by mistake, or maybe they'd chosen to examine his body whilst they focused on my mind. A numbness came over me. I suppressed my panic. My best friend was dead. I'd heard his words like an echo inside my mind. There's a certain balance here, you know? We crawled, climbed, and jumped down to different floors. My hands turned freezing cold from the metallic surface, then red, then numb, hard and pale. If I didn't get out of here soon, I would get frostbite. When we finally did get out, we found ourselves inside of the mine. The slaves didn't do anything to stop us. In fact, they acted as if they were afraid of us. I felt for them whilst we ran past, trying to find our way up the ramp to the surface. Their misery knew no limits. Their only crime was belonging to the wrong species, which apparently lay out of the Neanderthal's circle of empathy. I wondered what life was like in the heart of the Denisovian civilization. The Neanderthal slave drivers, snapping with their long black whips, luckily didn't seem to have been informed about us. We walked on a narrow path. On our right, the miners were hacking away at the bedrock with their heavy pickaxes, and on our left, a deep cliff revealed a dark canyon that must have been carved out by miners for over a century or more. Slowly, our skin got covered in black grime. One breath felt like smoking an entire pack of cigarettes. On the other end of the chasm, armed soldiers, talking to their radios, shone their flashlights in the faces of everyone to see if it was us. Dora kept going without any sign of giving up, but I couldn't tell where she was going. All I could tell was that we kept walking upward. After some time of this constant walking, she stopped. A deep rumbling noise followed, seemingly coming from the surface, and 1 second later a few stalactites fell into the abyss from above. It was a rocket launch, I figured, meaning we were finally close to the surface now. Dora remained still for a moment, as if she were contemplating what direction to go next. Then she said something to me and went on. We came to a couple of circular stairs. They were cramped and dark, but extending far up from the bottom. Slowly, while I kind of hunched behind her, Dora ascended the stairs. Somewhere in the middle, we heard some radio chatter a few meters further up. I felt like my heart stopped. I held my breath. Dora sat down and checked if her rifle was loaded. She pointed in front of her. The soldier above us must have heard us as well, because he expected us when he came down. He pressed himself against the wall like a shadow. He shot first, but only by a fraction of a second. The sound of the guns was amplified by the staircase. I felt a sting of pain in my shoulder. I was hit. The soldier, with his large hand on his chest, fell down. I touched my shoulder. The bullet had gone right through it, piercing me. Strangely, the pain didn't bother me that much. But that was probably just due to the cold and my shock. For the second time since I arrived, my eyes had to get used to daylight after being exposed to nothing but the dim lights for a long, long time. It looks like we had exited through an emergency exit and hadn't seen much use. The tower lay maybe a mile away. This was closer to the launching pad. That was lucky. The area had been evacuated right before the latest launch. Loud sirens, blasting a deep and eerie sound, could be heard from the tower. They were in a state of red alert, all because of our escape. 2 airships hung in the air, with a thin layer of snow on top of them. I looked around. It wasn't summer anymore. A few meters away, there was a parking lot. It was empty except for a truck. The guard in the staircase must have arrived in it. It was the same type as the ones the hunters had used. Dora climbed inside. It made sense that we wouldn't have gotten far on foot. However, the road led right through the site. She started the engine, just barely reaching down to the pedals. She gave me the rifle. This was it. The only way out. Soldiers were already approaching. They fired at us, but as soon as we reached full speed, there wasn't much that they could do but watch us race past them. The large truck almost fell over, bouncing on the left side, as Dora took a sharp turn to the next tower. I pointed the rifle out of the window to my right and fired at a couple of soldiers entering 3 cars that resembled black Ferraris from the 80s, but I didn't hit any of them. We smashed right through the gates that led out of the site whilst the guards jumped away from it. Thankfully, no one seemed too eager to shoot to kill, which made our escape much easier than it otherwise would have been. The 3 cars followed us silently. This was the same road the hunters had taken us to after they captured Alex and I. I kept my eyes open for the hill we had climbed. Would I be able to get back? I had lost a lot of weight since I got here and probably fit inside the opening by now, and Dora was definitely small enough. I wasn't about to leave her in this hostile place, not after she helped me escape. A woolly rhino, amazing to see even in my present condition, stood on the road in front of us. Dora ignored it and kept driving right at it at full speed. She looked at it with determination in her eyes. I was getting nervous. "What are you doing? Turn left!" I began to point with my hand and tried to make her understand. She didn't listen. I even tried to turn the steering wheel, but she pushed away with a forceful growl. And then, only a second or less from hitting the rhino, she sharply steered to the left. I fell to the side. Dora had known exactly what she was doing. Behind us there was a loud crash. I peeked out of the window. Our pursuers hadn't seen the rhino, and smashed right into it. A fatal frontal collision. The leading car was flying in the air, landing on its roof, whilst the others rolled over. Dora's decision to sacrifice the rhino, now lying dead on the road, had hopefully bought us some time we needed. Holy shit, I said and relaxed a little for the first time since we escaped. I put my hand on my shoulder. It had begun to hurt much more now. Dora took her eyes off the road for a second. When she saw the pain in my face, she looked genuinely concerned. There was a stillness on the road. The moon, a moon with no footsteps on its surface, could faintly be seen against the blue sky, and the sun was soon about to set. It was dusk when I saw the hill. "Stop! Stop! Stop!" I yelled and pointed at it. I tried to say a few words in her language to make her understand. She seemed confused, but eventually stopped the truck. There was no time to lose. I pointed at myself and then towards the hill. Then I grabbed her by the arm and made her follow me into the deep forest. We plodded through the snow, almost drowning in it. It would be easy for the soldiers to follow our tracks. I looked back at the road. 2 black spots could be seen in the sky, slowly growing larger. The airships. They were coming for us. I had to find the cave fast. But after all this time, it was difficult to remember exactly where it was. Soon it would be completely dark. We climbed the hill and went down on the other side. This was close. 15 minutes later, I found it. There was no snow near it, as if it had been melted away due to the hotter air coming out of it. Dora, understandably confused, looked at the small entrance. My arm ached and my entire body was shivering. If I didn't get back to my world soon, I would die of hypothermia. I fit into the opening, and especially the second opening inside. We had to take off as much of our clothes as possible. I tried to communicate this to Dora, but I'm not sure how successful I was. I began taking off her heavy cloaks and capes that she used to blend with the guards, whilst I pointed at the entrance. She just stood there, looking at me with the saddest expression I'd ever seen. Her cheeks were red from the cold and her large nose runny. Her cloudy breath was rapid, revealing her fear. When one of the last garments fell off her body, her eyes fell on her belly, and as I looked down, I saw why. She was heavily pregnant, carrying our child. There was no way for her to enter the second entrance in that condition. "No, no, no, no," I whispered as I began to cry. A million thoughts went through my head. I knew the airships were getting closer every second. They hadn't seen us yet. It was imperative that they didn't find, or at least took special notice of the cave. I put Dora's clothes back on her. There was no escape for her. She was going to get caught. And I was too scared, too weak. This moment is the one I'm most ashamed of. She had gone through all of this, trying to save the father of her child and herself, even though, and maybe because she was pregnant. And I didn't have the guts to stay by her side in this defining moment. I pointed to the right, tears running down my cheeks, and told her to go in that direction. And then I pointed at myself in the cave. After that, I tried to make her understand that she couldn't tell the soldiers about it. I did this by using a few words in her language that I had learned, and by pointing at the cave, then making the hush sign with my finger. There was no way for me to know if she understood what I meant. I could only hope. Perhaps she thought she would meet up with me on the other side of the cliff. I don't know. But after I yelled at her, she did as I said and walked away. Luckily, the lack of snow outside the cave meant we didn't leave any footprints for the soldiers to discover. The only thing I heard as I crawled through the small passage was the echoes of my weeping. I returned to the cave once a month, and there haven't been any signs of anyone coming out of it. I've put a large boulder in front of the entrance that can't be easily moved from the inside, and I've leaned some heavy stakes against it to see if anyone moves it. So far, It seems like Dora kept the cave a secret. Oh, Dora. By now, if she survived, my child is 1 year old. Not a day has gone by without me thinking about them. I regret my decision to return to my world without her. But during this year, I have been keeping myself busy. On the table behind me right now, there were a few things that were very difficult to get a hold of. A bunch of automatic rifles and semi-automatic pistols. Tons of ammo for them. Grenades, a rocket launcher, and a lot more. I'm going back. This time I'll be ready. I'm going to show them the true nature of Homo sapiens. They won't know what hit them. I'll give them hell. If you like this video, please consider subscribing. And if you're an animal lover like me, please consider donating to the World Land Trust, a charity that aims to help wildlife through buying land, preventing development, and helping endangered species.